Hi, after seeing everyone's initial posts and your introductions, and I realized how many of you have very similar backgrounds to what I do, and coming from very rural areas. And I know my experience, especially when it comes to the topic of diversity in the classroom. I know the experience I had in kind of going through some of those classes, and I wanted to kind of um, share the things that I, in hindsight, wish someone would have told me when I was at that point. Growing up, I literally grew up in the corner of a wheat field. All of my friends, when I was a teenager, looked an awful lot like me, because, to be honest, everyone around where I lived looked an awful lot like me. And I remember getting to classes that would address diversity, and in a lot of ways, like feeling guilty that I didn't have more exposure. They would talk about having diverse groups of friends or interacting with diverse people, and it'd feel bad because like I've not really done that. And you would do, when you're getting ready to go to college, you do scholarship essays and you would talk about your experience with diversity. And you're like, I don't really feel like I have any, and I'd feel guilty about that because like it feels like there's something wrong with me that I don't have that. I want to make sure you realize that that's not fair, right? You do not have to feel guilty for having the experiences that you have that have led you to this point. So you do not need to feel guilty for growing up in a community that doesn't have a lot of diversity. You don't need to feel guilty if you haven't had a lot of opportunity to interact with diverse people. You don't even really have to feel guilty if you've had opportunity, but you haven't taken advantage of it as much yet. And it's something you kind of want to grow in moving forward. My research in my dissertation and a lot of my bigger research goals are centered around making sure that folks from rural communities, that their experiences get represented and heard. And I remember one of the classes I took that made me feel like my voice was the least valued and that my experience was the least valued was actually a class that dealt with diversity. And that was one where I remember being like, that can't be right, that we just like, my experience isn't legitimate when it is my experience. So the advice, the two things I really hope for those of you that are from those rural backgrounds like I am, the two things I really want you to realize going into the class and then going on forward and going on into your own classrooms is that your experience is legitimate. You do not have to feel bad about where you grew up. In fact, you should be proud of that and embrace that what your experience and your background, how it has made you who you are, that's fine. And then the other thing is, one of the things that I think rural folks have an advantage in is that many times we're really good listeners. I've had the chance to take groups of high school kids traveling a fair amount. And one of the things that always it impresses me is, those kids are all from rural communities. And I always loved when you would see those kids, 15 or 16-year-old, and they would get in a situation where someone that they maybe didn't really know very well or didn't know at all was telling them a story. And a lot of times it was an older person who would be telling them a story, and they would listen and hear it out. And it always impressed me because I remember watching this a bunch of times. I'd watch this. I remember watching it, and it was kids that, like, with their peers, were not patient people. But it had kind of this ingrained mindset of you listen. If someone's talking, you listen to them. You're polite, you listen to them, you hear them out. And I think that's something that kind of in rural communities is a cultural expectation, that you listen to people and you hear them out. And I think that that's something that's an incredible strength when it comes to dealing with the topic of diversity. So for those of you that are coming from rural backgrounds, your experience is legitimate. And also think about that ability to listen as an asset. So maybe you don't have a lot of experience with diversity, but you do have an ability to listen. So when you have students in your classroom who are from diverse backgrounds, and maybe it's not something you have experience with, you can rely on that ability to listen to them and let them share their experience. and use that as a basis for building a relationship and moving forward. Like I said, I'm so excited by the fact that so many of you come from a very similar background. I hope that this class helps you not only develop in how you would address diverse learners in your own classrooms, but kind of helps you come to embrace your own identity for your experiences and your background and the things that have made you who you are.